Securities offered through Cetera Advisor Networks, LLC, member FINRA SIPC. Investment advisory services offered through CWM, LLC, an SEC-registered investment advisor. Cetera Advisor Networks, LLC is under separate ownership from any other named entity. Carson Partners, a division of CWM, LLC, is a nationwide partnership of advisors. This is The Way to Wealth, with host Scott Ford, a jiu-jitsu fighting, woodworking, beekeeping entrepreneur who is also the managing director, partner, and wealth advisor of Carson Wealth. Financial freedom is the goal, and clarity and simplicity is how we'll get there. Let's get to it. This is Way to Wealth.
Hello, and welcome back to the Way to Wealth podcast, where we're all about making money simple, allowing you to focus on living your life fully and doing it today, not 30 years from today. Very excited to have now a friend I would consider on the podcast, Bryan Doreian, and Bryan's with SDG Impact Fund. It's where I met Bryan. So first, welcome to the podcast, Bryan. Great to have you.
Awesome. Thanks, Scott. Thanks for having me here.
Yeah, looking forward to a conversation. That's what we do here. And so the audience doesn't know you, so let me just give a little bit of your bio. It would take me half a day to do the whole thing, but let me just give some of the nuts and bolts. I've already said he's involved with and a big part of SDG Impact Fund. That's how I actually met Bryan, through some of our work. Angie and I actually set up a fund we're working with them on. And then Chief Phil Lane with Four Worlds International is how we bumped into each other. Angie and I are close with Chief Phil and big supporter of the work they're up to. And he's engaged with SDG Impact Fund. So excited to bring some of this information on SDG, but specifically Bryan today. Lots to share about Bryan, high energy, lots of cool things he can bring. A little bit of his background, I'll just say: obtained dual masters or majors in chemistry and chemical engineer, dual minors in mathematics and biology, obtained a doctorate of biophysics, and was an All-American collegiate track and field athlete. So he's a pretty smart dude. So anyway, I'll leave it at that. And we've had some pretty cool conversations. You know, as you all know, Angie and I bought this property in West Virginia and have really turned it into, we're creating a Garden of Eden is our goal, and a permaculture setup to just have restore the land of what the land wants to be, and then have lots of food for the wildlife and for us to consume. So we've had a blast doing that. Bryan's doing the same thing with his family there in Eastern Pennsylvania. And so the goal here was to have a conversation. Bryan and I lately have been talking about obviously regeneration and regenerative things, because we're both up to that in our personal lives. And if you check out SDG Impact Fund, it's a big part of SDG Impact Fund. And maybe we start there, Bryan. Tell me a little bit more about SDG Impact Fund and what you are up to, and just kind of the lay of the land there.
Sure. And again, Scott, thanks for this, and looking forward to these continued conversations that we found ourselves in the middle of. I love the kismet of what's emerging. So yeah, SDG Impact Fund, at a macro level, it's what we're calling a hyper accelerated impact organization. Right. And the reason I'm using that is because it creates something of like, okay, this is something, right? Words have meaning. So if I said specific words right out the gate, you would attach the world's sort of personification of, oh, that's what that word has to mean. Right. So we describe ourselves as a hyper accelerated impact organization. We're open architecture. We leverage and utilize a 501c3 as part of our core infrastructure. And with that, we also leverage something called a donor advised fund, right? So those are a couple tools that we utilize within our ecosystem. So with that, being a 501c3, we have an ability to afford a tax-free environment, right, for the ecosystem to play with and be part of. And specifically what it does is it allows individuals, family offices, groups, countries, corporations to create their own, call it a charitable giving account, right? Where they can place assets into and then maintain the ability to steward those assets, right? So that's really powerful, because it means if you have an ability to be a steward, and we'll probably touch this, right? If you still can steward assets that you donate in and you get a charitable receipt for, it creates a world of opportunities, right? And so we'll dive into that in a little bit. All right. So SDG Impact Fund, the conceptualization was 2011 by an individual, a man named Tony Suber, who was principal gift officer at Notre Dame, helped spin up Notre Dame's DAF platform while he was there. So he was part of the team and crew that was around when that got spun up at Notre Dame, and then had a calling and conviction that what he was learning had to be brought to the world. It couldn't be contained in a specific university, right? So 2011 sort of struck out on his own. 2013 is when the first iteration of the platform and this ecosystem began. And then the SDG Impact Fund was officially launched at the UN in 2018. And so from 2018 to present day, we've been running, proving our thesis, building our ecosystem. And I believe we're proving the model of a new way of philanthropy and a new way of looking at resources and looking at assets and looking at what value is, right? So our broad purpose is for the attainment of the 17 SDGs. So those are the Sustainable Development Goals. Personally, for me, I look at those as, and you can get into a lot of conversations about the good or the bad and the UN and everything, right? So we are not a sanctioned official UN, so we don't fall under the UN umbrella. We're not part of that ecosystem. We have a lot of partnerships there. I look at the 17 SDGs as, if you look in the rearview mirror, if you've hit your mark, then those will have accomplished. Right. So, again, being an athlete and as you understand with visualization and everything, you have to visualize past. Right. So if I'm taking a free throw or something, you have to actually visualize the ball going through the net. So we're a very small, nimble, boutique run ecosystem. There's about 150 what I'll call either individuals or groups or entities that comprise sort of the core of our ecosystem currently. We'll max out at about 300 because that keeps a very relational, very trust-oriented ecosystem. And what I'm saying about it is you can think about each of those individuals or groups as individual silos as part of the ecosystem, right? So each one of those groups, like yourself, 4 World Global, they all have different assets inside of their accounts or inside of their stewardship capabilities. Right. But we, as sort of the meta umbrella, are providing the compliance, we're providing the ecosystem interfaces, the financial accounts, the charitable receipts, the opportunities for investments, et cetera, et cetera. So that's in a nutshell. We launched in 2018 with 100,000 of assets under administration. We passed last year. We passed 10 billion this past year. So the open architecture model, heart-centric model of bringing tools and resources to individuals to empower them to actually leverage and use stewarded assets to accomplish all sorts of incredible goals and investments and et cetera, is what we're here for. And we think the energy of the markets and the energy of, humanity is really looking for something like this. So
I couldn't agree more, for sure. It's why we hit it off and continue to have dialogue and conversation. And one of the interesting things, just what you all are up to with SDG Impact is, I think the name of the podcast is The Way to Wealth. Well, where did the Way to Wealth come from? Well, the Way to Wealth came from originally 2002. I've always been a big Benjamin Franklin fan, and he had written a book, hundreds and hundreds of years ago called The Way to Wealth. And I just repackaged it all the way back in 2002. I didn't even realize it at the time. What I've always been up to is taking ancient wisdom like that, people that you read after, and then bring it up to modern day time. So pairing ancient wisdom with modern day science and technology. And that's what I've done with The Way to Wealth. And one of the things, I think he said this, but whether it was him or not, doesn't really matter. I think it's true and relevant. And that is doing well by doing good. And that's what I envision SDG Impact Fund is about. It's why you have those principles, is just doing good in the world. And guess what? We can do well by doing good. So that's what I think is super cool about it. So I wanted to have you on, share the message with the audience. And then you and I recently have had some conversation about some things that I've been working on that I've been intrigued with, and that is nature. Obviously, we talked about a regenerative, landscape. And when you think of a regenerative landscape, It's called permaculture. It's called regenerative agriculture. There's all these different things. And ultimately, if you think of permaculture, it's permanent culture. It's like, how do you set this up in a way that sustains, and in some ways on its own, ideally, or as on its own as it can be, with less inputs? And I'm like, yeah, and that's really part of what I think we would do good by getting back to in our constitution. And then currently, I'm in wealth management, in our finances. How can we take what nature has to teach us and bring that into the investment and finance world? So Bryan and I have been talking about this, and I thought, let's do a podcast on it just because it's intriguing. I'm all about it. And certainly Bryan is as well and has a background in this. And I thought, we're just going to do a podcast. We're going to record it. So on that, let's talk about regenerative wealth. And again, we've had some chats about this, but what do you think about, what are your thoughts on some of what I just shared and your thoughts on, let's just say, regeneration, and let's call it regenerative wealth?
Yeah. So I think when we start thinking about regenerative wealth and regeneration, core value principles, right? What matters, the why matters tremendously. Because if you start from a mindset of fulfillment, contentment, understanding, health, clarity of mind, presence are incredibly valuable, right? And then the ability to actually exist and have another moment in time to be and then share with somebody else is incredible. That itself is incredible and incredibly valuable. So if you start from that premise, then it becomes much easier to layer in, other perspectives of wealth without having to really destabilize or disturb a core identity, right? If you don't start there, then, you end up with and I forget who said it, probably one of the very famous, robber barons of, how much money is enough money. And the quote was like 1 cent more, right? And, that's where we end up, good, bad, or otherwise. We've ended up in this ecosystem where the entire landscape of financial markets and capital markets and economy is extractionary, right? It is extractionary into how much asset or value in terms of money or real estate can I amass into quote unquote my holdings or my control or purview. My premise is we don't own anything. Right? Well, we're starting from a false premise with that. So we're already cognitively like out of balance energetically. If we think I own something, let's face it, we're stewards. Pick whatever religion or track or, tribal ancestry is. We're called to be stewards of assets. That's our heritage. That's our unique gift in being here on this planet. So I think, coming back to this principle and concept where I think a lot of individuals are going back to is we're stewards. We're stewards of assets. So how do I be a steward? And if you spend time in land and you spend time with nature and you spend time with, animals and family at its core, and you're there, you realize that by being a really good steward, the system, nature, just abundantly gives and provides, and you can't even control that. I mean, you can tweak things, but it's fascinating when you plant a tomato plant in your garden one year, and then the next year you've got a tomato plant popping up over here. You never planted, but the famous Jurassic Park quote, "Life finds a way." It's like, yeah, found a way. So from that principle, coming back to it, is I think once you get into a mindset of being a steward, and then you find yourself in positions of whatever layer of access you have of call it monetary assets, what we call, assets of where we place a value described by US dollars, right? Around that, then you begin to kind of parse that into, okay, so how do I appropriately, steward these assets in a regenerative manner? So part of it for me is in a new model, really looking at what are the unique opportunities around me in my local community, around the globe, now that we do have this access around the globe, to really put assets to work, right? And what I mean by that is looking at nature and looking at biomimicry, things in flow is where life occurs, right? If water doesn't flow, it goes stagnant. If my blood doesn't flow, I die. If I stop breathing for a long period of time, I don't have this oxygen, I cease to exist, right? So things have to have a rhythm. They have to be in motion. If they don't, they go stagnant. So if you look at an extractionary model, it's very static. It's very static, right? Assets get locked away and sequestered, and a lot of times off ledger or liquid assets. And that's where we put a value system versus it being really flowing and fluid, right? So that's number one for me. And what becomes really powerful in sort of the SDG Impact Fund model is the design of it is to take assets that are either stranded, like off ledger, or assets that are parked or inherited, and or take assets that you would have to, hand over in taxes, and actually allow them to be participating inside of an ecosystem where you can steward those and potentially help your mindset and help awareness and create models of, well, this is already de-risked capital, right? It's capital that I would have had to pay the taxes. So instead I put it over into a charitable giving account that I can still, steward over, and I can, make recommendations on how that's either granted out or invested, or, help a startup or create a business loan or pay for invoices, right? So now I can go prove my own thesis of, well, if I make a moonshot, right, investment into this startup company that maybe is doing water purification, or if I do an investment into a Series A company that's doing some sort of regenerative ag tech, right? Well, what happens, right? And you might be thinking, well, that's philanthropic dollars. Yeah, but you're actually helping the world by jumpstarting a technology that actually might be very beneficial for the entire global economy, because it's delivering, regenerative agri-tech, on a large scale. And well, then what happens to your investment? Well, then that fund just goes right back in your account tax-free. So you just created this cycle of now non-tax asset flow where you can then, I don't want to say recycle and regenerate that back into ecosystems. Yeah, you can do some grants out. Yes, you can regenerate into new investments, et cetera. But you now have this space where you're in a mindset of stewardship of assets, right? Because even I think the best of us is we still bifurcate into, this is my for-profit pocket where I'm going to invest out of, and this is my pocket I've got to give away. Otherwise, Uncle Sam's going to, come take his fair share. But what happens if what you give away actually hyper accelerates into outperforming over here, because you're liberated from having to think in the, I've got to get a 5x return, or, I got to get a 10% return on this. Over here, it's like, hey, if it comes back, great. If not, then I just took a chance on, good people or a good project. And if it does come back, well, now I just exponentiated my foundation to go bigger, right? So for me, I went into the SDG Impact Fund mindset on that. Regenerative wealth also is something that you can't metrify. and I'll say you can use financial tools and asset tracking to kind of, ROI on how well you did from an investment perspective. It's got to go beyond that, right? And I look at regenerative wealth of, there's the things that you invest in that you can't even see, right? So like, for example, I'm planting trees, I'm planting, apple trees and currant bushes on the property, and, digging out duck ponds and et cetera. Some of these things, I might not ever see the fruit of that, right? But in my core being and psyche, knowing that I'm doing what's right, I'm making a difference, I'm providing a learning experience for myself and my family, and maybe another generation, they're actually getting the rewards from that, meaning they're eating fruit and they're sustained, and maybe the community is being sustained by those apple trees and currant bushes. That for me is regeneration, right? That's regenerative wealth. Of there's a principle that you put in where it's not all about, am I going to see the direct rewards out of it? It is, will the rewards be here for whoever is here? And I might be here, I might not though. So I look at it from those principles of, some things you just do because you have to, right? It's in your core gut. And usually when you look at those are really regenerative things. But the beautiful thing is, I think we're at a point in time where we're understanding from a financial analytics, actually doing these impact investments and doing these regenerative minded principles with our finances, it actually far outpaces every other model we had in the past.
I think of a guy I worked with in the past. His name's Doug Doreian, and Doug helps on, land improvement, et cetera. And one of the things, he's been a farmer, and he inherited, I don't know, call it 400 acres, maybe 300, something like that. And he came up with a slogan, and he actually has shirts now. And I love it. I'm like, man, I love that thought process. And his shirt says, "It's not my land, it's just my turn." And that's exactly how he's looking at it. It's like, I inherited this land. Yep. It's going to go to my kids and my other siblings' kids. And all it is it's not mine. It's just my turn. Yep. I'm like, what a beautiful way to look at it. And it's like, it should be true for all of it. And so that I just thought would be good to share. And then your comment on extracting, I couldn't agree more. It's like, if getting back to natural law, like nature, does know how to take care of itself. And so a tree is wanting to take care of itself, recognizing that it's part of the whole. It also wants to give back. So if we can have that mindset, yes, we have to live. And is this investment going to be good for the whole?
Yeah.
So and this goes so many places. So let me just try to synthesize and simplify it. So if you think of a tree, that tree is going to produce fruit or nuts. So we planted like over 500 nut trees several years ago on the property. And to your point, some of these do start producing their chestnuts in year 6. So we may see some benefit, but this is generational stuff. So I'm thinking in multi-generations, back to the indigenous of 7th generation thinking. And the multiple benefits that provides is, you mentioned thinking. The other thing that's a tangible is, if I know that outside of some lightning or crazy flood or crazy storm, which is a rare event, these trees, once producing, will produce every year, will grow every year, and likely produce more every year. Yep. That is valuable to some generation. So 1, it's good. 2, it's going to help nature and animals and things. 3, it could free up my psyche to use more other liquid assets now during our lifetime to use for our energetic needs and wants, knowing that's going to the next generation. So it can be something tangible, but nature then is looking at it. This is going to produce enough food for animals, for us to eat. It's going to reseed to produce more trees. So it's giving back. And it's like, that's how we could think about it. So we have a thing. I got this from a friend, Garrett Gunderson. There's a book out there called Financial DNA. And then Garrett is come up with a term called Investor DNA. Well, what I like about that is, it's true. We're all in nature. Everything's unique. We're unique. So I think a lot of times we get boxed into doing a thing a certain way. What are we unique at? Can we invest in something and show up to that investment in a stewardship thought process? Is this investment good for me? That's fair. And is it good for the community? Is it good for the all? And does it align with what I believe in? Versus setting things aside that you have no idea what you're invested in. And sometimes you may be invested in something that you'd be appalled at what you're invested in, and you don't even know it. So what we do in our process Way to Wealth, outside of the foundation piece, is this 3-bucket approach to allocation. And so we call it savings, income, and growth. So the whole game is cash flow. It's not stale assets. It's You can't use a balance sheet. You can't spend a balance sheet. You can use cash flow. So like we talk about setting up your own banking system and then using that as leverage, not to sit just in the bank. What do banks do? They don't sit on money. It's flow. They take your money in, they lend it out. They're making it on the spread. And as soon as they get a repayment from the money lent out, what are they doing? It's going right back out. Why do you think they're so profitable? If you pull them up as far as their profitability on what they pay versus what they're getting, it's exponential. And there's all kinds of reasons why. One is because it's not their money. So as an example, I tell people, if you have a 5% rate of return that you're getting, that's what they're in. Good luck with that nowadays, by the way. And then they lend it out at 10. What do they make it? And everyone says they're making 5%. That's pretty good. No, they're not. They're making 100% because it's not their money.
It's not their money.
They just doubled it. So it's flow, and nature knows that. So I love that idea that you mentioned mention there. But I'll take a pause because I imagine you have more to add here.
Yeah, agreed. So one of the things that came in as you were saying that is, and maybe this might be controversial, who knows, but whatever, right? It's all good. Is so it's so interesting because you could look at somebody, let's say, that has 1,000 acres of land and somebody else that has 1,000 acres of land. And from an outside perspective, if you have no conversation with them, et cetera, they look identical, right? But one of them could be sitting there and feeling, and the means by which they obtain said land, again, was just, misguided principles, and they don't feel content and whatever. And the other person arrived maybe at a stewardship point in their life and they went, I feel called to do this. This is what I have to do, right? So what ends up happening is we put these prescriptive sort of boxes around, enough value or not enough, or enough possessions or not enough possessions, et cetera. And it's just all fictitious stuff because at the end of the day, it's really about the person, right? And this is what it comes back to. It's about you as an individual. I don't want to say doing work, but going to your core, walking through yourself, the choices you've made, the choices made to you, all of those events are helping potentially to catalyze you to come to an awareness of who you are in relationship to yourself, others around you, the earth, spirit, divine, God. Like all of these are opportunities for that reconnection really to your sovereignty, right? And your call and command to be a steward here. So with that, it's really interesting because, for some people, it goes back to the investor DNA, right? Some people have an incredible gift of awareness of assets and awareness of markets and et cetera. And so their potential to really, I'll say, harness and steward assets is like mind-boggling. And what ends up happening is we can put a judgment around that person and be like, well, they shouldn't be making that much money, blah, 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 blah. You could then also on the argue side of, you want somebody and you hope people that are really hard aligned and convicted in what they're doing that can actually tap into the systems that are built to actually take those flows and put them more into regenerative models. I feel like that's part of our calling in this point in time is we have existing systems that are here. They've been built, right? A lot of us can see the cracks in the ways in which they're not serving, they're not beneficial. I believe a lot of the perfect timing of this is to allow for those flows, almost like a dam breaking, but not all at once, right? But like, hey, water flows can start to be, tributized and, in mycelium networks and flow out actually back into this regenerative stewardship concept, right? So it was just an awareness for me because, and again, my upbringing too, it's like, we can tend to cast judgment really quickly on, oh, that person's made, or they got tons of money and whatever. But the flip is, it's like, if they are actually in their seat of purpose, right? Yep. Ego has been removed and they're working through those things, then my goodness, like that's so powerful.
That's so cool, man. And speaking of being grateful, super grateful for you being on, sharing your wisdom with my audience. So with that, thanks for being on the Way to Wealth podcast and audience. We'll catch you back next week where we're going to continue working on making money simple. Why? So you can live fully and live fully now, not 30 years from now. So catch you on next week.
The opinions voiced in Way to Wealth with Scott Ford, Managing Director, Partner, and Wealth Advisor of Carson Wealth, are for general information only and are not intended to provide specific advice or recommendations for any individual. Past performance is no guarantee of future results. All indices are unmanaged and may not be invested into directly. Investing involves risk, including possible loss of principal. No strategy assures success or protects against loss. To determine what may be appropriate for you, consult with your attorney, accountant, financial, or tax advisor prior to investing. Guests on Way to Wealth are not affiliated with CWM LLC or Cetera Advisor Networks LLC. Legato Family is not affiliated with Cetera Advisor Networks LLC or CWM LLC. Carson Wealth, 19833 Leitersburg Pike, Suite 1, Hagerstown, Maryland, 21742.